I was just reading the news, and the government just gave an order to freeze people's bank accounts so they can't take their money out. That's that's huge.
That's huge.
That's if you can't take your money out,
So
what's going on? This is really serious. The central bank has not corrected what has been published talking about the freezing of depositors' accounts, is what it says. So the central bank refuses to say it's not true. It's true. It's true.
it's
I'm pretty sure it's true. I heard this a couple days ago. I'm pretty sure it's true because they have a really big economic problem that's gotten a lot worse recently, and it's going to get only worse from now. It's not going to get any better. But because of that, if people start to take their money out in large scales,
Mhm.
then they will definitely have defaulting to the banks. And once the banks start to default, then they're fucked. So they really can't afford to do that. The only way you can prevent it, though, is if you don't let people take the money out of the bank accounts. But then again, it's your money. And if you can't take it out of the bank, what does that say? Oh, yeah, we can say it. Well, listen, let's just state it. We don't have to state it as a fact. We can say a lot of people are saying today that you cannot take your money out of the banks. What's with this? Or they're about to make a move that you can take the money out of the banks. It's very, and it's true. I mean, listen, I'm reading Russian news right now. I'm going through Telegram,
Mhm.
and everyone's talking about it.
So this is huge, that they don't have enough cash.
They lack liquidity. So because they don't have enough money in the banks, currently the central bank every week is giving them short-term loans called repo loans, where they give them enough liquidity to exist for the week and to handle basic transactions.
Mhm.
In the course of the past few months, we've seen them putting more and more restrictions on normal citizens taking out their money. It's very funny how they do it, though. They never say it's, because they want to prevent you from taking out your money. They say it's because there's a lot of fraud. There's a lot of fraudsters
Yeah,
who
yeah.
are trying to steal your money. And to prevent you from being defrauded, we don't let anyone take out their money. And it's like, this doesn't make sense. Like everywhere in the world, there's fraud in every country, but still you could take out your money. Why can't you take your money? It's because they know that if people started taking it out, like last month, they had, give me an example. Last month, month before last, they had $19.7 billion taken out of the banks by shareholders. Last month, it was 2.5% of all deposits were taken out, and 79% of that money never went back to the bank. That is, people are keeping their house or something.
Mhm.
That's a huge amount of capital that people are moving out. So when you move out that much capital and the bank's not going to have more liquidity, then it gets to a crisis. And Russia today is running out of dollars and euros. So when it eventually runs out of dollars and euros, it's going to have two options. It's going to have to print money, which is going to create hyperinflation, or it's
Mhm.
going to default. And if it defaults, then it's going to get real exciting.
Uh, do you see an uprising of the Russian people?
I don't think there'll be an uprising. I think what's more probable is that we will see. So right now, somebody's gaining from this. Let's start with that. The oligarchs around Vladimir Putin since the war has started have gained incredible amounts of wealth. In fact, they've gained 7.1 times more wealth than the other oligarchs in the country, those who are close to Putin. More than 90% of all the companies that were taken over by the government, nationalized, or in other ways taken by the courts, more than 90% of them ended up in the hands of people around Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin right now is putting all the nation's wealth into his relatives and his friends' hands.
Yeah.
My hypothesis right now has changed actually about Putin and his regime. Is that increasingly I think that they are trying to, it's like a going out of business sale. They're trying to take as many assets as they can before everything collapses. I think they realize that it's actually dying. I think that they might realize that this is not sustainable. The amount of wealth that his friends have made just in the past couple of years is more than the entire military budget of Russia. So just imagine how much wealth they've made.
Oh.
And they're just robbing the country totally, just totally robbing the country. And meanwhile, across Russia, we see they're closing down hospitals, they're closing down education, they're closing everything down. But they keep making sure that the contracts are paid for by those who are close to Putin. So my view is that it's something sort of like corporate raiders, like Carl Icahn and TWA is the one I always use, where you go in, you take over a company, and you sell off the assets, and you drain it for all the liquidity it has before it's dead. You've murdered the company. It has no more actual value because it no longer produces anything, but you've enriched yourself as much as possible before that happens, and that's all you care about. It's bad for the shareholders. It's bad for everybody except for you, but you can do that because you're the CEO. And I think that's pretty much what's happening.
The Siloviki, are they turning against Putin? Because he's the reason of the war and all the misery.
Well, the thing is, it's very interesting. So remember, I mean, what I just said is, if you're close to Putin, there's a number of oligarchs and a number of the leaders and a number of people in Slovakia who are making lots of money because of this war. I mean, they've become incredibly wealthy because of it. So I think that might be, so if Vladimir Putin does not know the truth, if he does not know that the country's actually dying,
Yeah.
it's only because he's surrounded by other people, such as the Slovaki, surrounded by these oligarchs worth, billions of dollars like Kavalchuk, and they are making so much money. They're going to him. They're saying, "Listen, everything's fine. This war is wonderful. Let's
Yeah.
keep it going. There's no problem." Why? Self-interest. I can totally believe that's the case. I can really believe that's the case. It's very believable. And even when you look at what's going on in the military, it's obvious that they gave up the hope of like advancing inside of Ukraine because they're not even paying attention to it. They're doing nothing to try and improve the situation. They're not spending the money on it. They could. They have the capacity to do so. They're choosing not to. And I think it's because they'd rather spend the money on things that will produce more income for themselves.
They are seeing that Russia is going to collapse. That's inevitable.
Yes, that's true. I agree with it.
I think those people want to save Russia somehow, and they know it will become so bad. What's your opinion on that?
The real conflict for Putin, I mean, where he could realistically face problems, there's a lot of places where he could face problems, but one of the ones that's talked about the most are the nationalists. So in the world of the nationalists, historically, Putin had a good relationship with them. He was viewed as being sympathetic to their causes. I've argued for years and years that Vladimir Putin is not a nationalist. He uses nationalism, but ideologically, he has no strong attachment to anything. I don't think he has any strong belief about any system. I think it's just opportunism. In the end, he's a criminal, and he wants to make money, and that's what we're seeing right now.
Yeah.
He's destroying the country. Listen, he's enriched his friends just in the past couple of years with more than the entire budget of the Russian military. If he had not done that, let's imagine he said, "We're going to put it all to the Russian military. We're not going to allow that. It's going to really go to help the Russian soldiers." We'd have a totally different situation in Ukraine today. Thank God. He cares more about making money for his friends than he does about the future of Russia. That's why they're in the situation they are.
Yeah, but so how will the whole thing end then? How do you see the end of Russia, of the war? Everything.
So, right, it's one of the fights they're having right now. So there's a guy that's, well, as you know, he's the Minister of Defense. His name is Belousov. Andrei Belousov, is viewed very positively by the nationalists. He's viewed very positively by the veterans, by the soldiers. He's said to be extremely religious and that he believes that they're sort of on a holy war. He really believes in the soldiers and supporting them. Now, he's in a conflict, though, and he's connected to Sechin, of course. He's Rosneft, right? So it's an intelligence sort of gang. Now, on the other side, though, you have other people right now inside the Kremlin who don't really care about this war. It's just opportunism for them. And the big fight they're having right now is the election that's to be held, I think it's September 22nd this year for the Duma. There was a move to try to get 1/3 of the members of parliament to be veterans from the current 3-day special military operation. The people that were coming from the political circles were saying, well, let's choose this guy, that guy. And these people were never actually in the military. They were, technically in the military, but they never actually went to the front or, they had a job where it required one day trip to the occupied territory and they came back. But technically, they're active duty officers. So because they're active duty officers, then they were hoping to get positions in parliament and they go forward. Belousov is rejecting that. The Minister of Defense. He's saying, no, we have to have the guys who are actually in the trenches, the guys who are actually fighting. That's the real veterans. And I insist that only they go. Now, why this is important beyond just the members of parliament? It's creating a conflict. The veterans are already angry. They're not happy. And one of the reasons that the people in the political circles that want to choose these elites who, had fake military service, the reason they want them is because they're politicians or the people that are rich. So they know they could trust them to work with them. But these soldiers, they could be crazy. They could gang up. They could turn against the government. They could be opposed to what the party wants to do. And they would have actual political force because they're from this veterans group. That's what they're very afraid of. And they should be very afraid of that. Because if these people, listen, you've seen that the Russian military is not attracting the best and the brightest people. These people as a collective force, though, undoubtedly have access to weapons as well. They could be very dangerous. So it's going to be very interesting to see how they try to manage that.
Yeah, I'm wondering all the time, will Putin survive the whole thing?
No.
No. So when Putin is gone, tell me how you think will Putin be killed?
Well, I think the most likely way is that, and it's not necessarily because somebody hates him. It's sort of like when they killed Nicholas II. It wasn't really born out of hatred. It was just because nobody needed him anymore. Um, that's why they kept him. I mean, if they really it was for hatred, they would have killed him immediately. They waited a long time to do it. And the reason was because they were hoping to trade him, or maybe he'd go somewhere else. The White Army didn't really fight to get him back, but neither here nor there. That's a different story.
I
In
mean,
the case of Putin, yeah.
yeah, no, didn't want to interrupt you, but I think they must understand that this war is not good for Russia, and that this war is not good for everything. It's killing the
But
economy, it's killing everything, and so Putin is the only reason for this war, and that's why they have
but
to get rid of
they're
Putin.
fine. Once again, they're fine with that. If you're in the elites that have made, I think these tens of billions of dollars, why would you be against the war? It's been very successful for you.
So you don't think that
They don't care. I don't think they care about Russia. I mean,
No,
look
I
at
don't.
something.
I don't mean they don't care about Russia, of course not. But they understand that they cannot make any money anymore if there is no
Well,
oil
that's why I
revenues.
think that's why I think we've reached a new stage of this war, is that they are now realizing it's the end stage, and they're taking out everything they can. I mean, at this point, they're just stealing so rampantly and so wildly, because this might be the last chance.
And that's
And
why
let's be honest.
yeah.
Yeah, you have $13 billion. If you get an extra $200 million or you don't, you're gonna be okay. You realize the system can't last forever, so you're gonna take as much as you can. Now, what's interesting about Putin and the top 50 richest people in Russia, which I just happened to look at earlier this morning, look at the number of them who are not from Russia. It's a very large number. It's probably, I don't know, 20 out of the top 50 are not actually from Russia. And when you consider that, it makes a lot more sense that, do they really care what the future of Russia is? Do they have any interest, or do they have an interest in making as much money as they can as quick as they can? I think that's what they have an interest in.
Yeah, and have to get all the money, or have the money get out of Russia, of course, to get it into some safe havens.
That's
Is
what they're doing, and they're moving around very quickly. I mean, they've invested a lot of money across the world. Actually, it's a whole thing about the Wagner Group
yeah.
back when there was still Prigozhin. That was part of the whole thing of the Wagner Group, was that it was a foreign investment club, because with him, you would go, you could extort local fiefdoms for money to give them protection, take over gold mines, take over salt mines. And look at Solidar, which is a salt mine in Ukraine. It's also a city which they had a major battle, as you know. Solidar, I want to say, and I have to look, but I could be wrong. It's 60,000 Russian casualties, I think, to take it. The reason that Prigozhin wanted it and why he lost that many men was because it has a salt mine. He wanted to be in charge of a salt mine because he thought that would produce long-term capital for himself. So if you're willing to kill 40,000 of your own soldiers or injure them for a salt mine, do you care at all about your country? No, of course not. And it's not a question. They just don't care at all. We shouldn't think of this in the sense that it has any relevance. You've seen the video, or maybe you haven't seen the videos. If you go to Russian Telegram, or Ukrainian Telegram even more, you could see the videos of the Russian soldiers being beaten by their officers for money. It's the most horrific thing in the world. It's every day. Every day you can watch them being electrocuted by their officers, laying there naked on the floor, and they're dumping water on them and electrocuting them until they get them more money. So that's what they're there for, is to extort money. They squeeze all the money out of them, and they send them to the front lines to get shot, and then they collect the money that was their paycheck, and they don't report them dead for a while. And then finally they say they ran away. They went AWOL, so the family doesn't get any sort of commission, and that's the end of them.
Sure.
So if that's how the officer corps of Russia operates, do they seem to you very concerned about what the future of the war is? I don't think they really care. I think they would be sad to see this opportunity to make money disappear. I think so, yeah. But outside of that, I don't see any interest. I look at their military elites. It's actually surprising that Russia. It's incredible, but Russia, look what they've lost in the course of this war as far as tanks and armored vehicles and things like this. Just incredible amounts. They'll never replace it. Like, when will Russia ever have the resources to replace all this? They never will. It was the Soviet Union that built it. Never. So who's worried about this? And just strategically, if somebody was strategic somewhere in Moscow, they'd say, we have to keep the reserve this, because if tomorrow is a conflict in the Caucasus or, with China, we'll have to. They don't. They send it all and gets destroyed. Strategically, they should at least reserve things for future conflict. But they don't.
Is Europe prepared? Of course not. When Putin is dead, what will happen then?
It depends who takes over. I think the most likely scene would be positive for everybody once he's dead, for a number of different reasons. And the most simple reason would be this: whenever you take over power illegitimately, you just sort of kill the leader and you take power. It's the most dangerous phase of what they call revolutionary phase, post-revolutionary phase. So you overthrow a leader, he's dead. Now people ask you, how'd you come to power? Like, what makes you the legitimate leader? I want to be a legitimate leader. I want to take over the country. I want to be the new czar. And how do you justify yourself? And that's actually where historically you have a good chance of being killed. So when there's counter coups, counter revolutions, that's what it prompts. So what you have to do in that stage to survive is to make sure that you concentrate soldiers in the capital. One. Two, you try to get international recognition and national recognition as much as possible. To obtain international recognition, though, specifically, like from the EU or the US, there's a couple things that you need. One is we can be sure you have to have access to the nuclear weapons. Because if you don't have access to the nuclear force, then what really makes you the legitimate leader of Russia? I mean, that is actually a crucial part of what defines the leader of Russia, I think, in the international eyes. So, okay, let's assume you have that. Actually, that's what they say Prigozhin, when he went to Rostov, as you know, there's a nuclear facility there, a nuclear base, where there's nuclear weapons. And that was one of the objectives of going there. But either way, I digress. So I think that's one part. But the second part is, if you're talking to the Americans or the Germans, whoever it is, you can't say, and I plan on continuing to fight my war inside of Ukraine. They're not going to give you the recognition. But if you know that you're going to take over the leadership of Russia, you're going to make literally tens of billions of dollars in the first year. Do you really care about the future of Ukraine, or do you care about making tens of billions of dollars? Because right now, if you fail in your coup attempt, you're going to be dead, and they're going to kill you and your family. So you better be successful in your coup attempt. You have to prioritize. It's always about prioritization of resources, time and money. So the prioritization would be self-interest and survival. To achieve that, you would probably have to concentrate the troops in Moscow, cut off things that are extenuating, such as the war in Ukraine. Doesn't really matter how it turns out on the battlefield. It's a non-issue. Nobody can do anything about it. It really just doesn't matter. But at that stage, once you consolidate power, you have another job ahead of you, which is to liquidate your opponents. So when you begin liquidating your opponents, and that's going to be the most dangerous phase, the next most dangerous phase, you're going to have a lot going on. People like Shoigu recently, if you look at how they're essentially emasculating him, they're taking away all of his people. The number of arrests, 7 or 8 officers, generals and stuff, deputy ministers who have been arrested as circulating him, that were around him. You'll also look at another, 7 or 8 people from the Ministry of Defense that were appointed by him who have been fired or jailed recently. They're definitely getting rid of his clan. His clan is being liquidated in real time. It's going to be interesting to see how that works out. But if you look at how this historically plays out, it doesn't work out well for those who lose. So best thing you can do is make sure when you go all in. You make sure that you don't lose the capital. You maintain control of the nuclear weapons. And you have the ability then to stay in power with some degree of stability.
So this was all from the Russian side, what you said. But from the side of the war, what would it mean? Would this be the end of the war, the immediate end, or would the war continue?
I think so. I think it'd be pretty quick.
So that sounds good. So
I think, and there's if someone doubts it, I think the most obvious reason why it'll probably end quickly is the trigger. Okay, anytime that there's something like a coup or a revolution, in the period leading up to it, there's a phase where you try to look for when is the most opportune moment to do it. So when is it that people go from being angry and upset to finally actually deciding it's time to go do it? One of the things that you look for is to see the reaction in society. You have to look for a period when the society is not going to reject you. Because if you do it and the people come to the streets and throw you out, that'll be a disaster. So you have to look for a moment when the society is open to it. When Prigozhin had his uprising 2 years ago, you remember the people came to the streets and they greeted him very positively.
Yes,
they brought him food and wine. They greeted him as a hero. They had selfies with him. That shows you how the Russian people reacted. So that's a very interesting story. But second to that, even the senior leadership of the Russian military, they didn't call an airstrike on him. They went and drank coffee with him in the street. They're scared of him. So once again, that's the reality of Russia today. So let's imagine those you take power tomorrow. You have this war in Ukraine. You need those soldiers in Moscow to protect you and your regime from the other factions. The other factions, and a lot of people don't seem to realize this. Okay, in Russia, currently in the war against Ukraine, let's say there's 650,000 Russian soldiers that are in the vicinity of the theater of Ukraine. In Russia today, there's about 400,000 Rosgvardia, which is Russian National Guard. They're under Zolotov. He's a guy who's been with Putin since St. Petersburg. But what's interesting about that is a huge military force, 400,000. And during the course of this war, you don't see them getting killed. You don't see them at the front. Why isn't Putin sending them to the front? If they're not doing well, why doesn't he send them? Because it's not about Ukraine. It's not about advancing there. It's about having troops that are loyal to him personally, that he controls, that people he trusts have them. That's why he's a Rosgvardia. Then look at the private military companies. Thousands and thousands and thousands of soldiers de facto working for the government, because some of the private military companies are actually from government state-owned agencies or government state-owned businesses. They have thousands of their own soldiers. Many of them were in the military before. They are veterans with combat duty experience. These guys, though, are there to protect the assets if there's something like a destabilizing event in the country. For instance, the oil and gas companies. They have thousands of guys who are real soldiers with real weapons. They're not security guards. And the reason is, if it turns to true feudalism where they're fighting, you have to have these sorts of people. Russia is totally established to have this. In fact, there is historically, I got to look this up, but there was several thousand Chechens they used to keep in Moscow, they always said. And the reason they kept the Chechens there was because Putin always believed that if it really turned bad and there's major protest or, major rioting, whatever it is, disorder, the ethnic Chechens would not have as much of a problem to kill off ethnic Russians. So they would, shoot up the Orthodox and not have a problem, whereas the Russian soldiers themselves might have a problem shooting Russian civilians, whereas they don't think the Chechens would have this problem. And that's why during the course of this war, if you look at the death rate, fatality rate by region of Russia, Chechnya is right below Moscow as the least amount of fatalities, just below. And it's because the Chechens' job in this entire war, everyone says that they're TikTok soldiers, and I know everybody mocks them, but there's a reason that they weren't there. It's because their job isn't to die right now. Their job's to die defending the Putin regime. And Putin's doing a lot to try to maintain them. Listen, the Chechens, 92%, 93% of their budget for their region, or their oblast, or territory, comes from Moscow. It's not self-produced. They don't produce a lot there. That's a whole different story, though. I'm going down a totally different rabbit hole. But when you look at them, it's part of something larger. It's internal dynamics of Russia, which, if we want to understand it better, I would argue the way to do that is to think of it as a feudalistic society. Truly think of it like feudalism. If you really think of it that way, it does make a lot more sense. It really does. So when you see them over here warring with Ukraine, think of it like a foreign prince against another foreign prince. They don't think of it in the terms of country as much as territories and controlled units. So this guy's in charge of the gas empire, and you make deals with him, hence oligarchy operating the way that it does. You look at the number of people, and the whole idea of states is not as important as the feudalistic system, that it's clans. And in Russia, that's what it's about. It's less about doing for Russia and more about dealing with your own clan and the group that you're part of and the protection of it and the protection that it provides you.
When all this will happen, Putin's gone, the war will end. Would Ukraine get their territory back?
Well, if tomorrow the Russian lines were to break, which, by the way, I was saying that, triggering events, I think the most likely triggering event that would cause the downfall of the Putin regime would be economic in nature. If the ruble were to collapse or something like that, that'd be a signal that you can do whatever you want. Because at that point, when you stop paying the soldiers, you lose your military. You've got significant problems, and that can happen very quickly. So, going back to what you asked, though, I think that Ukraine would have the opportunity. We have to see what happens. It's all hypothetical, but I think it would be reasonable to believe that if the Russian lines were to completely collapse, they stop paying the Russians. Look back what we saw in 1916, 1917. In that period of time, we saw that the Russian lines were losing on average 100 to 150,000 soldiers per month. That's a lot of desertion. Now, in total, there was 12 million Russian soldiers called to World War I. 9 million of them were killed or injured. So those are pretty staggering numbers, right?
Yeah.
And it forever changed, by the way, demographically the country. But either way, when you have a country as this sort of experience, the soldiers don't have a lot of faith in the military. There's not really a strong belief in very much other than opportunism and survival. It really, in behavior and mannerism, is much more similar to a prison. The way that they treat each other, the levels that they have, it's like Soviet prison. Even the terminology they use, there's prison, Prigozhin. A lot of slang he used was actually prisoner speak. It was not military slang. Now, why I mention that? I think it's the same thing. Is the day that the prison guard dies, does everybody stay there? I don't think so. I think they leave. I think it'd be the same thing to the Russian military.
Okay, well, that was very interesting. Thank you so much. Everybody who has watched this, please support this channel by giving a like and subscribe to the channel. Also, consider becoming a channel member. Thank you so much, Jason, and see you the next time.
Great talking with you.